Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight I'm out in the desert and I have a story about a woman who goes to Idaho on a ski trip, and she has something that happens to her, an encounter that is so shocking to her that she believes had she not had other witnesses with her at the time, she would not even believe that even happened to her. That's next. Okay, so for tonight's beer we have the Dust Bowl Brewing Company, and that is the California Golden Ale. Check that out. So obviously I have not been able to find a cool or refreshing stream to put this in, but I did have it refrigerated at the house. So we are good to go. Good enough anyways. I got crickets tonight too, so there we go. Yeah, a little different for me. I'm out in the desert tonight, kind of on a little canyon here, and got a nice starry night, and I got a 3/4 moon right above me. It's pretty cool. So, cheers. Well, the story tonight takes place in Idaho, and Idaho is a really interesting state. It's actually part of the Rockies, and I don't always consider Idaho as part of the Rockies. I consider it obviously mountainous, but I always think of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico as the main Rocky Mountain chain. But the Rockies actually extend into Idaho and Utah. And in central Idaho is a large wilderness area called the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. 2.3 million acres. Pretty cool. Pretty large expanse of mountains, rivers, lakes, pine forests, valleys. And that's central, and south of there, just south of there, not too far, is a town called Ketchum, Idaho. Really cool little mountain town. It's got some history. It's got the Sawtooth National Forest around it, and around town there is the ski resort of Sun Valley. It's got a history of, goes back to the 1930s, 40s. Pretty cool history. Really great area. This woman's name was Beth, and in 1992 she was invited out by her sister who lived in Ketchum to go skiing, and her sister was really generous, didn't have kids at the time, and her husband were really generous with their money, so they would fly her out and they would hang out and go skiing, or in the summer they would do other activities, hiking, things like that. So she came out one year, 1992, to go skiing, and she brought her boyfriend, and they went skiing for the day. I believe it was early January, and they were coming back from skiing. There was snow on the ground, and they were in a pine forest driving down the highway. It was night. It gets dark early that time of year, 4:30, 5 o'clock. It's pitch black, and this was well after that. And both sides of the highway were lined with this pine forest. And they were driving along, and she was talking to her boyfriend, and the car suddenly stops. The brother-in-law just slammed on the brakes, and she remembered she was in the back seat, and her head went forward and then hit the back seat of her sister's seat. Her sister was sitting right in front of her. Boyfriend is over here, brother-in-law is driving. And she immediately thought, oh, there's a deer or an animal in the road. When she came back up like that, and she looked between the seats, and she could see what she thought was a hunter walking across the road. And the reason she thought it was a hunter, because the headlights of the car illuminated this thing that was walking across the road, and it appeared to be orange. And hunters, as most people know, wear orange to protect themselves so they can be seen in the woods and not get shot, things like that. So her first thought was a hunter, and this upright human-looking thing was carrying a deer over its shoulder, and it looked like the deer's back had been broken, and it was just draped over the shoulder of this, now, after looking at it, very large, unusually large creature walking across the road right in front of their vehicle. And it's pitch black out, snow on either side of the road. And soon as she realized how unusually large it was, she was just in shock. She was just like holding her breath almost, and nobody said a word as this thing with the deer took 3 large steps across the highway. And about 2/3 of the way, as it was walking across the highway, she noticed it had like a slight hobble, and right before it went down into the ditch, it switched the deer over to the other shoulder, which appeared to be maybe stronger, and it continued and then dropped into the ditch. And from the side lights of the headlights, you know how the beam fans out, they saw it go into the trees and then stop. It just stopped right there. And they couldn't really see it very well, but they could see the fur of this thing through the trees. And it was just standing there, and they could see it moving kind of back and forth like that. They couldn't see much. And for whatever reason, the brother-in-law in the front seat, the driver's seat, immediately got out of the vehicle, opened the door, and quickly went over to where this Sasquatch, just what it looked like, dropped down into the ditch, and he was standing there looking down in the ditch. Beth could tell that her sister wanted to scream at him, but she was so shell-shocked by what she had seen, they all were, that she was just holding her breath like that, and just knowing that it was almost too late because he was already out there. And he was standing there, and he had a disposable camera that Beth's sister bought for him that day. And back in the early 90s, 1992 and the late 80s, they had these cameras that you would buy, and you get 12 or 24 shots. You'd take the pictures, and then you would bring them and have them processed, and they would just open them up, and it was like a disposable camera. And they bought this for him for their ski trip. So he's standing there with his camera. They're in the car, the lights are still on, the car's running. They can see this thing standing there in the trees, and he pulls the camera up like he's just about to take a picture. And then they hear this blood-curdling, really loud scream, howl. And it just rocked right through their bodies. They could just feel it. And instantly, the brother-in-law turns and runs back to the car. And the door's already open. He jumps inside and pulls the door shut. And as he's pulling the door shut, they can see from the ditch now, this thing had jumped up onto the shoulder of the road, and it ran towards the car, right towards them. And it stopped about 8, maybe 10 feet away, and just was staring at them. And it was obviously like pissed off at them. And it no longer had the deer on its shoulder. So later they theorized it felt threatened that the brother-in-law would go over there while he was carrying this deer, thinking, you know, maybe he's protecting his kill. They didn't know for sure, but he just looked really angry. And he's standing there looking right at the car and them. And Beth is on the other side, and her boyfriend's here, and the brother-in-law's up here. And then this thing standing, they could see it standing like this. It was just only like 10 seconds, maybe. It felt like a minute. And then it took 2 quick steps, like a bluff charge, towards the car. And nobody was saying anything. They were just like, just freaked out and in such a shock that they couldn't say anything or even, let alone scream. And then it stood there, and then it turned really quickly, and it ran and jumped into the ditch and was gone. And they didn't really say a word. They're like, get it and drive, and they took off and got out of there. And they realized they had had an encounter with a Sasquatch. It was clear to them what they had seen. In fact, Beth could see the features just enough, because when it was in the side light, standing there on the highway looking at them, it was no longer walking in front where the light was hitting it and giving it this orange tinge. They could still see just enough of it that it was very large, maybe 8 feet tall, hairy, and had this big brow ridge on its forehead, really large eyes, and a kind of a flat nose, and this small, kind of an angry mouth. And Beth, even years later, she couldn't really identify what it really looked like, because it didn't look really ape, and it didn't look really human. It was like almost like a different animal, and yet it had parts of ape and human and some other animal. There was nothing in fiction that she could think of, like Chewbacca or something. She always remembered that. And she also always remembers that had she been by herself, it was just such a surreal experience. She believes her memory just would not even have registered it, at least in the long term, as something real, because it was so shocking to her. But having her sister and her brother-in-law and her boyfriend there, and they all confirmed and reaffirmed each other what they had seen, and they talked about it, and years later they even talked about it. And so she felt like she wasn't alone in this thing that she had seen. And she just always remembers that she knows for sure, Beth, that went to Sun Valley, Idaho, Ketchum, she always knows for sure that she had seen and experienced an actual Sasquatch. Pretty wild story. Really, seriously, I couldn't imagine what that would be like to have that kind of direct encounter like that. I can't imagine what that would feel like, and then the long term, you know, what is that like when you go to sleep, and months and years later, you know, what it feels like to go in the woods at night or anything. So, and yet here I am out in the wilds. So I do love it. So thank you for watching, you guys. I really appreciate you guys, and yeah, always remember that you don't need other people's validation, but you do need confidence in yourself, and believe in yourself. It's really important. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. And if you guys like hiking, backpacking, and stories about the strange, unexplained, and things that go bump in the night, please like, subscribe, and comment. I always appreciate that, and I read everything and answer as much as I can. So, all right, you guys have a good night. We'll see you on the next one.